Hi, everyone. We're going to start with a statement. 70% of transformation projects fail, and it's rarely because of the technology. Today, we uncover the number one reason transformations crash and exactly how to avoid it. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Faces of Future Ready. With us today to discuss this is Beth Mclaughlin from UHY. UHY is one of the largest professional service firms in the US, offering audit, tax, consulting, and advisory services across several industries. UHY combines deep expertise with a 360-degree view of their clients' businesses to deliver flexible, innovative solutions. Their collaborative approach helps organizations grow, transform, and succeed. Beth is the Director of Organizational Change at UHY. Formerly Director of Financial Systems, she brings deep expertise in financial technology and large-scale transformation. She has led major software initiatives that drive both process and organizational change. Beth is a certified change management professional, known as a CCMP, a project management professional, a PMP, and a former board member of Oracle Applications and Technology Group. Beth, thank you for joining us. Welcome to today's episode.
Thanks, Joe. Excited to be here. Excited to chat with this group.
Well, I'm looking forward to this. Let's dig into this topic. Why do most transformational projects fail? I think people look at the tech and the technology solutions, but what's really driving most failures?
Yeah, Joe, here's the hard truth, right? Most failures start before the project even begins because change management is often treated as an afterthought. So people often think, particularly in a systems project, if we pick the right system, if we configure it correctly, the rest will fall into place. But technology is really not that make or break factor. People are. And you can have the most powerful, beautifully designed system, but if people aren't ready, if they're not willing or able to use it, you're not going to get the results you paid for.
Interesting. So how can companies look to their people to be that pivot point for success? What can they do to drive that process, maybe even from the very start, to make that difference that matters?
Yeah, there's a lot they can do, and I want to give you an example here of a company that did this really well. We UHY worked with a large healthcare organization that had 17 different accounting offices and over 300,000 different account reconciliations they had to perform on a monthly basis. I should say 300,000 account code and profit center reconciliations they had to do. And this may sound familiar to a lot of people on the call here. Their processes were manual, they had no standardization, and they had very limited visibility across their organization. So the CFO, she knew that they were not going to be able to grow under this the structure, right? And they wanted to grow. So they decided to implement Blackline, and they partnered with my company UHY to help with the implementation. But here's what they did really well, and here's why it ultimately succeeded. They made change a priority from day one. So they really started early with change management. And the other thing they did was they really engaged leadership from the start. So leadership was very engaged, involved right from the beginning.
Interesting.
Additionally, oh, go ahead, Joe.
Now, so just breaking this down into a couple of points. I don't mean to interrupt you,
That's all right.
but when you say leadership is engaged, help me understand how a company does that, because getting buy-in to me seems to be critical, because lots of pieces have to happen as part of this process. So maybe let's stop and help folks understand, what do you mean by starting that process of getting engagement?
Yeah, I mean, the leaders do need to be engaged right from the start, and they really need to set the tone for what the project vision is. So, we as change leaders often do a project kickoff. We actually give them a little bit of education about why change management is so important, because a lot of leaders really have not effectively implemented change management as part of their projects in the past. So we gather the leaders and we really talk about what are the project goals and how can you put yourself front and center to make sure that you're communicating with your teams early and often throughout the project. So it's making sure that that vision is really well defined and that we're working as change leaders to make sure that they are front and center and using opportunities throughout the program to communicate with their teams.
Interesting. And when you talk about change management and change as a process, can we maybe break that down into some pieces? Because, you know, if you tell me that, I'm not sure if I'm thinking the same thing you are. I'm not sure if, you know, what does that really mean? Because it's such a broad term. I think breaking it into the pieces so that people understand how does that work, and for example, what does a CFO do, what does a controller do, what does a project implementer do, and how do you create that environment?
Yeah, I mean, you know, change management honestly is not it's not something that you can just bolt on halfway through a project. And that's one of the things that we as change leaders really try to instill in every project that we do, right? Many companies that we work with, they think they can bolt on change management halfway through the project. And what happens is they get into the build, they realize people may not be ready, so then they say, okay, let's bring in some training and send out some email updates, right? And this is one of the things I really want to talk about is, you know, change management is more than just training and communications. It is really a foundational program that brings people to the new ways of working. They move from current state to future state. But here's the thing, if you put an effective change management program in place, you're going to work to sustain that user adoption. So it's not just about a project launch, it's about sustaining user adoption. And Joe, you kind of asked a little bit of a breakdown on how we actually do this, and a little bit more detail on what change management is. And I like to refer to, we use what's called the ADKAR model. So I don't know if anybody's on this call has heard of it, but it's a very popular model. We really like it because it gives you a step-by-step method to support change throughout a program. And again, our goal is to successfully adopt new ways of working. But here's the thing, you can't just skip steps. So you can't just walk into training and think that people will accept that training or, you know, really adopt the new way of working if you haven't brought them along for the journey. So we use this method called ADKAR. It stands for awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, and reinforcement. So, you know, the key here is that you have to start with awareness. Awareness means that people know what the change is and why it's needed. So when we come in and support change management projects, that's one of the very first things that we're doing. We're building awareness across the organization. Once the teams and the stakeholders are aware of the project, then you can start to build some desire, right? So, desire means I want to be part of this change. I'm excited about this change. That's one of the hardest things that we can do as change leaders, but it's also the most important because you want people to be excited about it. So once you built that desire, then you can move on to the knowledge phase. Knowledge is where we spend a lot of our time as a change management professional, right? We want to make sure that people understand how to change and what to do when we go live with that new system or whatever project we're putting into place. Only then and there, if you've really done the work to bring forth awareness, desire, and knowledge, then you can really focus on ability. Ability is really where training comes in, right? Because ability means I actually can take the steps. I know what to do when we go live. It's the step by step, more tactical awareness of what you're doing in the new state. And then from there, you go live, but the work does not stop. You really need to reinforce what you have trained on, and you want to make sure that people are not reverting to old ways. So they want to keep doing what they're doing, and they're not going to revert to old ways of working. So that's, you know, that's the model that we like to use to explain change across change management and how we implement it at UHY.
That's interesting. I appreciate you going through that. That's a pretty in-depth definition of ADKAR. I honestly had not heard that acronym before, so that's helpful. But it makes tremendous sense, and it seems that maybe even taking a step back, change management through an ADKAR model like you just described, it seems like change management must become almost cultural, because you have to get everyone's buy-in from significant leadership in the company down to team member level, because things are going to change and there's a reason that they need to change. So as part of this, do you get into the why of going through the changes that you have to implement?
The why is one of the most important things that you can leverage as a successful change management team, right? The why really needs to resonate with people. It can't just be something that is sitting on a PowerPoint slide and coming at high level. And the reason is because if you think about it, change is emotional. People often fear change. They don't know what's coming until they really start to break it down. And that's what we are trying to do as change leaders. So the why is so important to focus on, and it has to be something that people feel and that they connect with. So that's what we really focus on is, we call it the what's in it for me or the WIFM. So I don't know if you've ever heard that term, Joe, but
I
that's
have.
one of your that's one of your, biggest tools that you can leverage as a change leader. And if you have a positive WIFM, that's really your strongest tool for adoption. Now, of course, oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say it's interesting because not long ago I was in a situation and we were talking about bringing in a new tool for a process, a finance process, and one of the stakeholders involved made a comment, well, as long as it does things the way we used to do, which came up kind of as a red flag. And I don't know if you've seen that in some of your situations. So the why seems important, not just for people to understand, but to get buy-in at all levels. So maybe you can just help us understand how folks can do that to get buy-in, because understanding why without really fully appreciating it seems to be part of the challenge of making progress.
Yeah, I think it's a lot in what the language that you use, right? So I'll give you an example, and actually this is one that healthcare company that I mentioned did really well. They knew that the system Blackline would bring them benefits, but instead of just saying, "Hey, we're modernizing our systems," they actually spoke to what the people cared about, right? So they talked about, right now you're chasing down data. You're spending a lot of time, you're working late nights. And with this tool, you will spend less time chasing down data and you're going to be doing more meaningful analysis. You'll actually be able to get home to your families during month end close at a reasonable hour. Your audit surprises will be fewer and far between. So it's really looking at your stakeholders and looking at messages that are going to resonate with them. So, making it personal, making it specific and very motivating really helps with that.
That's interesting. So you definitely share that vision and you get people's buy-in. And to your point you just made, hey, we're going to make your life better, and try and change things and remove steps that are unnecessary. That's interesting. So you went through the ADKAR process, which again I find interesting, and hopefully people will get some good info out of that, and then into the why. So what's next in a step of both implementing change management and providing that structure for people to make successful transformations?
Yeah, I mean, I think once you go live, it's really important that you are measuring and adapting how you're doing as a change management effort, right? So, before you go live, you really want to look at what are your program goals? What defines success? And you want to align with that success criteria. And you want to say, okay, this is what is going to, we're going to consider this a success. Now, how are we going to track it? And you're really going to define those metrics. I think it's important to remember that change management or change in general isn't just a set it and forget it once you go live, right? It's a dynamic process. And go live, oftentimes we as project managers, for example, see it as the finish line, right? But from a change management standpoint, it's actually just the first checkpoint in sustained user adoption, because you need to really keep measuring, adjusting, and supporting people long after launch. And that's really the difference between just a project launch and a true transformation.
So in this process, you've triggered a thought, and it's a question I have. Help us understand how critical it is to actually measure the baseline environment in terms of measuring post-transformational success. That you mentioned that, but is it important for financial leaders and those who own the process to take a look at what are we doing today? What's good or bad about it? Let's measure that process, because I'm just assuming that gives you a baseline from which to measure success post-transformation.
Yeah, Joe, are you sure you haven't worked in change management? Because that's one of the things we actually talk about all the time in our practice, is that it's really important to understand your current state. Because as you design your future state processes, you want to be able to measure and understand that change and really truly understand what the impacts are. So if you don't have a good starting point, you really don't know what good looks like once you go live, and you really can't define those metrics. So that's one of the things we also focus on, is really looking at your current state, taking some time to understand your current state, your current situation, documenting it, and then moving forward as you design your future state.
And does that actually help build the roadmap to transformation by saying, I think of navigation. Navigation has 3 points. I'm starting, I'm ending, and how do I get in between those two to clear my route? And so I'm assuming that becomes your pivot point for transformation, to say, hey, we're doing this, and it may not be very good, but it's where we are. And that's how. And I also think of the notion you can't manage what you don't measure. So pulling that together, I think, seems to be a good aspect of managing change.
Yes, absolutely. And we've seen it work both ways, where we've measured adoption, we've measured really adoption metrics, and we've seen. And it's actually really important to be specific about what you're measuring too. So you don't want to just say, "Hey, is everybody adopting the new system?" Right? You can look at things like system logins or how many people attended training, but that's not really truly going to tell you if people are actually embracing the change, right? So you want to look at metrics that are going to show you if you've designed new processes, are people using those new processes? Are people struggling to understand the new processes or the new system? And if so, is it across the company? Is it one particular group? Because then if you do stumble in your project, you can then tailor your reinforcement activities to make sure that you're helping that particular group or focusing on that particular area. So it is very, very important. It really helps you kind of clear that path and keep focused on that sustained user adoption.
And what are some of those adoption metrics? I know you mentioned a couple. Are you signing on? Are you doing this? But are there broader points people can look at across their teams to make sure that people have embraced and adopted the changed procedures, whether it's systems or procedures, and what their outcomes should look like?
Yeah, I mean, there's all kinds, and it really gets back to you meeting as a project team and looking at what you define as success. So, for example, if you want a faster close, you need to understand how long your close takes today. You need to have some pretty specific metrics about the components of the time it takes to close. And then once you go live, you want to put those same metrics to the test, right? And so you can look at if you want to look at time to close. We did a project where we were putting in a new ERP for a manufacturer. Inventory was a big success metric, and the use of inventory. So we've looked at things like how accurate is your inventory before and after you process the system. So there's all sorts of metrics you can look at and put into place. There's no one-stop shop. It's really about your project and what you define as a success.
And in terms of tracking transformational metrics, are there metrics or points that you can measure, not just pre and post, but are there ways to look at the transformation as it's happening? And how do you help keep a project alive? How do you keep the momentum going, so that sometimes they're small transformations, sometimes they're larger, but what are some ways or some things that people can think about to say, we're not there yet, but we have to keep the pedal down to keep things going.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we've done that works really well is, system demos, for example. So early and often, kind of letting users peek under the covers and look at the system. This works really well, by the way, if you're running your project using Agile, because you can tie those demos into your project routines or touch points. But everybody, it's funny because everybody wants to be trained early, right? Everybody says, oh, we need system training. But as change leaders, we actually don't want to train people. True end user training should happen right before project go live so people don't forget. But you can do things like system demos, and you can give them little peaks of what's about to come, and you can gather their feedback. So you can do it in a live setting. Ask the team members, how do you feel about what we're doing? Is there anything you want to change? The other thing we often do is we do a lot of surveys, sentiment surveys, and we don't just do them once. We do them before and after every major milestone. We want to know how people are feeling throughout the program, and that should change over time, and we want to measure that sentiment over the project.
Okay. One question, just going back to this ADKAR model.
Mhm.
You mentioned, awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, and reinforcement.
Mhm.
Are there steps within that model that people should know about, or you think it'd be helpful to share, just because that's obviously a series of either steps or approaches to get to the desired end, and thinking through that, maybe taking just a couple minutes to dig into a little bit more deeply. Do you think that'd be helpful?
Yeah, that would be great. I mean, like I mentioned, awareness is the first step in any program. And awareness, you can do a lot of different things. We've run awareness campaigns. And the major thing here is it's that leadership engagement, right? When you are introducing a change at a very high level, you want your leadership front and center communicating this change, because you want to communicate the overall project goals, the vision, and you want to make sure that the leaders are aligned. So when we do awareness campaigns, it is broad and wide across the organization. We are prepping leaders to have, the vision statement with them, and we give them some easy talking points. And whether it's the project sponsor or the other leadership team, we make sure they have aligned messaging and a clear vision of what we're trying to communicate. When we move to desire, I want to be part of this change, right? It's building that excitement. So you can do a lot of fun things. This is can be fun, right? You can do project contests, you can do all sorts of different fun things to make sure you're building desire. We did one in a project where we actually went and did some raffles. Right, it was a manufacturing environment, so we went right out on the manufacturing floor, and we did some fun contests, and we gave away some backpacks and some other things, and it really resonated well with the team. So anything that you can do, and you want to look at the culture. The culture is really important. What is going to motivate your team specifically? And that's how you want to tailor that. If we think about knowledge, that's really where we spend a lot of our time as change leaders. You want to start to really break down the impacts stakeholder by stakeholder group. So you really need to spend some time talking to people, understanding your stakeholders, understanding what their current state is, and what it's going to be like when you go live, so that you can tailor your communications. So we've done things like create specific tailored we call them walking decks, where the leaders can walk around to their teams and really start to break down step by step. And this is where we start to involve more middle management in this knowledge, because while the higher level leaders might be communicating broad and wide, you want to hear from your direct manager about, okay, how is my job going to change when I go live? And that's kind of what we do from a knowledge standpoint.
That's interesting. I just thought of something while you were describing that, and it would seem appropriate or reasonable that team members at various levels have different levels of understanding what has to happen, beginning at the senior leadership team, CFO, controller, down to the accountant doing the reconciliations, for example. Different levels of understanding what has to happen to get the task completed. And sometimes the people for the lack of a better word, pushing the buttons, doing the work, have a much more in-depth knowledge of what's actually happening. And help us understand, how do you get that worked into the program so that the best decisions are made using the best information in a transformation like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the key here is cross-functional representation, right? So you want to make sure that when you form your project team, that you've got good cross-functional representation across your team. And if you've got higher level leaders that, might not be in the day-to-day, you want to support them by setting up ways of connecting with the lower level leaders. So for example, if you have a director on your team, who's really tight for time, but is the representative of that function for your project, we can work with those leaders to say, okay, here are some talking points. Do you have a regular team connect? We'll come as change leaders and we'll support you during that connect. And we tend to provide a lot of the materials for them because they're too busy at times to really create their own messaging. So, that's what we really try and do as change leaders, is we try and work with all levels of the organization. And another thing that really works well too is if you have a very big program, you can set up a change champion network or a change agent network, which means you can pull lower level and higher level. It tends to be middle management leaders across the organization. You can pull them in and you can give them a monthly update. And that's really effective because what they can do is they can go back to their teams and communicate. But here's what's really valuable. They actually get the feedback, the real feedback from their teams, and they bring it back to the project team. So it's opening up that two-way communication and that feedback loop that's really important to understand what's happening from a people side of change.
Interesting. So one question I have is, as we go through both the ADKAR model and through change management as a process, and measuring the improvements in overall processes, can you maybe share at what levels do you share, say, either major or minor metrics to help people understand the benefit of the transformation? I mean, obviously, if it's a closed process, you say, hey, it used to take 15 days and now we can do it in 5, or it used to take 10 and we can do it in 3, whatever that delta is. But understanding all the pieces that make up that change, how do you communicate that and process that through the transformational process?
Yeah, I mean, we start with the project team, right? We share those metrics every week with the project team. We get their feedback. We make sure that what we're measuring aligns with the project team. And then a lot of times we are sharing those metrics very wide across the organization. So we look at the key points and then we often share them. We'll give them to the leaders. So we've shared them in things like all hands meetings, and we'll do a summary, and we'll really go and show all of those metrics on a slide, but we'll then translate it to what's actually going to speak to people. So we don't give them a bunch of technical metrics that they may not resonate with or understand. We're going to break it down in a way that they can understand, and something that connects, right? Because like we said, change is emotional, it's a journey. And if people see positive metrics, they're going to stay motivated. If they see
Right.
negative, and alternatively, if we see negative metrics, we're going to get some feedback and we're going to adapt our plan, right? Because like I said, change is adaptive, it's iterative. You have to constantly be measuring and adapting your plan. And that's the point of really looking at those metrics.
So you just brought up what I think is the last aspect of this process, and I think it may take, or it may be helpful to take a few minutes and talk about the adaptation piece of that.
Mhm.
Because to your point, yes, if you make the change metrics relevant and relational to people, and then you run into something that may not be exactly what you'd expected. Can you walk through a little bit of the adaptation phase and how you've seen teams or companies have to work through that process?
Yeah, I mean, you have to keep measuring, adjusting, and supporting people, even after you launch, right? So, one of the things that we had a struggling client that we knew was going to be a little bit of a challenge because they did not include change management as part of their process. So they called us in about 6 months before go live, and We took a look at readiness, right? We surveyed teams, we talked to people. They were not ready for the change. So we actually recommended that they pause the project, but they really didn't want to because they had already had a few failed implementations and they just wanted to push forward. So we really focused on those user metrics and that hypercare. So hypercare is that kind of period after you go live. We kind of pivoted from a change management standpoint and we said we know these teams are really going to need help, so we really put a lot of focus on hypercare metrics and watching teams as they went. And one of the teams in particular, we saw their inventory process. They weren't connecting with the new inventory process. This was brand new for them, so we had to adapt our program a little bit, and we designed new reports to help them. We put a new, we suggested that they put in a new role really to every single shift change. They looked at this report and they went out and then they verified that the process that was put in place was happening. So that's an example of, you can really look at those metrics, and if they show something that shows a particular group struggling, you can do things like refresher trainings, or you can build one pager trainings to help them, or whatever it is they need. We've seen it. We had an accounting and finance team that was really struggling with a new system because they had a lot of decisions to make. And we saw that with the metrics. They were struggling with the new process. So we did things like create decision trees for them just to help them. So that's really what it's all about, is looking at those metrics. And if you see something that needs to adapt, you come together as a team and you quickly look at who's struggling and why, and you put programs in place to support them.
Interesting. So we've kind of, to summarize, we've looked at change management as both not just a process, but important culturally to, excuse me, to instill at various levels the need to follow a change management program. You discussed the ADKAR philosophy, which I thought was really helpful. I hadn't heard that, so I'm glad to hear that. And how proceeding through the change process, measuring it and reinforcing it, and then, to your point, adapting as necessary. Anything else major? Because I got a few questions at the end. But anything else that you think would be important to share as we think through after having wrapped up this process?
I think it's really just, really embedding change management into your programs. It is going to be so much more effective. If you want successful projects, change management is the key to that success.
Interesting. So we haven't done this before, but we're going to give it a shot. I'm going to do what we call a myth-busting lightning round. We might have a couple of questions afterwards, but I'm going to make a series of statements or questions, Beth, and if you don't mind just responding, because it might help people with some of the thoughts that they have. So statement number one: change management is just training.
Well, I hope I've hit on this a little bit, but training is an important step, but it is just one step in the journey, right? If people don't have awareness, desire, and knowledge, it won't be effective. And if you have to, you have to reinforce it once you go live, because it's not just about project launch, it's about sustained user adoption. So it's all of those other steps in ADKAR, not just the training, that makes it successful.
Interesting. Second statement is people will adapt naturally if the tech is better.
I would say to that, better tech doesn't always mean easier, right? How many of us get something very technical and we don't understand it, so we don't use it, right? So, better tech doesn't always mean easier, especially without support or knowing how to use it.
Interesting. The last statement here is we can figure change out. Actually, we can figure out change after we go live.
I would say that's kind of like building a house and then realizing you forgot the foundation. So it's those foundational steps in ADKAR that are really important right from the start for change management success.
Interesting. Well, it looks like we have a couple of questions. The first question is, what governance structures have you found most effective for maintaining accountability across the three rules?
Yeah, I mean, as a project team, you want to define your governance structure, one that fits culturally with your organization. But I would say it's really important to define your project sponsor very early in the process and put a project charter in place that really talks about the roles and responsibilities on the team. That project, sometimes people ask, can you have more than one project sponsor? And you can, but we don't recommend it. You want that one project sponsor who's going to be the defining person if you run into an issue. And then from there, you want to make sure you have good cross-functional representation from the business, IT, and your development team. So that if you have a good cross-functional representation from those three groups that report up to a project sponsor, that usually works well.
Interesting. Another question is, beyond adoption rates, what early warning signs indicate a transformation, indicates that a transformation is heading towards a 70% failure rate?
I mean, you can look at all sorts, but honestly, usually people will tell you if things are not going well, it's really about talking with the teams. And if you see a disconnect between business requirements and what is actually being designed, that's usually a pretty good indicator that you're not going to have success. And we've seen this, right? And so I talked about those system demos. That's a good way. If you show a team a system demo and they're talking about a requirement that was never captured during the project process, that you need to go back as a team and really make sure that your project requirements are aligned with what's being developed.
Interesting. Wow. Well, we've covered quite a bit. I've got a couple of quick wrap-up thoughts that I think might help folks. You may have mentioned some of this, but if you had to put Beth's final 3 rules for change management out to folks who are listening, something you think people will get the most out of as a wrap-up to this discussion, what would those be?
Yeah, I hope it's come through, but embed change management early in your projects. It's not an add-on. Embed it early, right from the start. Make sure you're communicating the why, make sure it's resonating with people, and you want to keep adapting as you go.
Very good. Very good. That's very wise words for us all to get some benefit out of. So Beth, we really appreciate you spending some time with us. I want to mention a couple of quick things, that change management as a certification exists, and there are classes for that. And so people who might be interested in the CCMP as a change management designation should reach out to Beth. And if this is the best place, maybe perhaps reach out to you on LinkedIn as a way to connect with Beth. Please do that. And I want to thank everyone for joining. I want to thank you, Beth. And just to wrap up with the message, technology doesn't fail. People aren't the problem, but the connection between the two is a change management approach, and to embed it early, get buy-in across the teams, help communicate the why, measure, manage, and adapt as necessary. And any final thoughts, Beth, before we sign off?
No, just please, if you want to learn more about change management, reach out to me on LinkedIn. Would love to hear from you.
All right. Well, we appreciate that. I think that's a wrap for this episode. Thanks everyone for joining. Hopefully you got some good benefit out of this discussion. And if you have more questions, please reach out to Beth directly. And I think that'll wrap it up for today. Thank you for joining us. And I hope everyone has a good afternoon and a good day.
Thanks, Joe.
Thank you.